about a 2-week course. It's not cheap. So that you're prepared to teach the correct methodologies and the correct rules and the correct road rules and everything else.
Yeah.
To just bring in lay people in and teach them, you're going to have a diversity and uniformity in what's being taught. That's one of the NZTA's biggest gripes is that they don't have uniformity in what's being taught. So how you get around that, I'm not. Other than training the trainers, I'm not sure.
Okay. No, they're interesting thoughts from you, John. So a few obstacles in the way, but not insurmountable, basically.
I did like one point, I maybe a little bit off track, but what Winston's proposing is a little bit comes back to the egalitarian society we live in, that it's our God-given right to drive.
Yeah.
Where I think we should be taking a note from overseas countries where it's actually a privilege to drive. And a personal instance I have is I've got a son in Scandinavia at the moment where they won't recognise his Kiwi driver's licence. And he has to go back and retrain again. And we're talking hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars. And my initial reaction was, gee, that's a bit over the top. But then you have a look at the death rate on the road over there per capita and our death rate on the road here, and I think it answers itself.
There is a big difference between us and Sweden, isn't there, in terms of death rates?
It's not Sweden, but it's in the location.
Right.
Yeah.
And people are forever saying how seriously, for example, the Germans take learning to drive. But if you actually learn to drive and pay a driving instructor, you can spend a couple of $1,000s in New Zealand, can't you, John?
Very easily. I'm not saying that all your hours of learning behind the wheel have to be with an instructor, but I think there should be a minimum amount for a professional instructor. And I've just spent 11 years teaching fully licensed drivers, mainly for health and safety for corporates. And we've got people that rock up on our courses that don't even know how to adjust the mirrors. I'm not joking.
No, really? But it's still funny.
It is still funny.
Don't know what ABS is, and ABS has been around in cars for nearly 4 decades now.
Okay, well, we hope they're not part of Winston's plan.
Coming up again.
John, thank you, John Brown. On the pen, no, we shouldn't laugh.
No.
But
not laughing.
Police told us, now I can tell you're not laughing, police told us the other day that they do prosecute people for not indicating when they're driving. And Tony has an idea. He says, Jim, if police need to fill the government's coffers by stopping people speeding, see, everyone says that, don't they? Yeah. Here is a good idea. All they have to do is put cameras at intersections and roundabouts and see if they indicate or not. And the vast majority of people would incur an instant fine. It would swell revenues and require less policing. It's a genius idea, really, isn't it?
We have the technology, Jim.
That's right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I'm dismayed in Auckland by the red light running. And I know that people have probably talked about this before, but it's absolutely epidemic. It's extraordinary. All these people are in such a hurry. And the lateness of the red light running. Now, I mean, it strikes me that I could point out a dozen intersections where you could just put a camera and just bang people all the time.
They don't have that problem in Tauranga, Finlay. Nothing like that, I don't think.
I'm going to confess about something that happened to me, and there's not many people I've told about this, but I went through a stop sign near my house a while ago, and I was pulled over by a police officer who proceeded to write on a ticket, and I was quite perturbed by it because I said to him, I wasn't speeding, I'm not drunk, my kids are in a nice car, they're strapped in, it was on one of the safest stretches of road in Tauranga, and I looked at traffic and there was no traffic coming and I crept through. And the police officer said to me, you've broken the law and you crept through without stopping. I nearly came to a standstill, not going to lie, nearly came to a standstill. And I said to that police officer, are you concerned about my welfare? Because if you are, you should have been parked just in front of the stop sign so that I saw you and thought, I'm going to get a ticket and I'd have to stop. He wasn't concerned about my welfare. He wanted the money and I had to pay for it. So there you go.
You're quite right about Auckland. Often the light will go red and 3 people will then go through.
Oh, you just wait. You don't go on green, that's for sure. That's defensive driving, Auckland style.
Speed up at orange. Speed up at orange.
At all costs. Silvina Good, thank you so much for coming on the panel. And
thanks for having me.
Finlay McDonald, you too. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Jim.
Checkpoint with John Campbell. Thanks, everyone.
Kia ora everyone, I'm John Campbell. On behalf of our excellent team, haere mai, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Tau te mai rā I hoa mā, hei kōrero kei te haere, hei kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Tonight, Nikki Kaye takes leave from Parliament after announcing she's been diagnosed with breast cancer. The Prime Minister has just talked about the length of her treatment. We speak to the parents of a baby who died from what appears to have been meningitis. They still don't know, after being turned away from a hospital 3 times, despite the fact their 7-month-old had a rash, an aching body, a high temperature and was changing colour. We're at the final day of the cross-party inquiry into homelessness, and breaking news, Green MP Kevin Haigh is just announcing he's leaving Parliament, new lending restrictions from October, and Bernard Hickey on how the so-called building boom may not be what it seems. All of that and much more in the next 89 minutes. But first, Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. A Hawke's Bay horticulturalist is backing comments by the Prime Minister that immigrants are needed to fill jobs because too many locals have drug problems or a bad work ethic. A record 69,000 people settled in New Zealand in the year to July, while more than 200,000 people are listed as unemployed. John Key admits high immigration is putting a strain on the country's infrastructure. But Mr Key says the government will continue to bring in large numbers to fill jobs because employers often struggle to find local workers. A grower and director of Horticulture New Zealand, Leon Stallard, says Mr Key's comments are spot on.
I use a theory, if I need 30 people, I get 40 people locals, because on average I only have 30 every day. They just don't turn up, they couldn't get a ride, or I don't know. But their reliability, you just can't depend on it.
Hawke's Bay apple grower Leon Stallard. The Prime Minister says he wishes the National Party MP and Cabinet Minister Nikki Kaye all the best as she battles breast cancer. Ms Kaye was diagnosed on Friday and will begin treatment shortly. The 36-year-old has been the MP for Auckland Central since 2008. John Key says he's spoken to her several times since the diagnosis. On her Facebook page, Ms Kaye says the diagnosis is devastating for herself and her family and has asked for privacy. The Health and Disability Commissioner is blaming poor communication and bad judgment for the death of a toddler at Dunedin Hospital in 2013. Anthony Hill says the unnamed 2-year-old girl died of a serious bacterial infection and pneumonia, which was not picked up by doctors or a nurse. The child's mother had taken the toddler to the hospital emergency department twice with a high temperature and a cough and been sent home. She'd also called and been transferred to a telehealth service which failed to help. Mr Hill says it was a sad case involving mistakes by those who had the information they needed to do better.
The system had enough information to know that it could have treated this patient appropriately and should have. Sadly, by virtue of some communication failures and some errors of judgment, that did not occur, and this little girl was discharged when she should have been held longer in the hospital and further inquiry undertaken.
The Health and Disability Commissioner, Anthony Hill. Parents are endorsing a critical report that highlights exclusion and under-resourcing in the education of children with disabilities. The report from Youth Law calls for a rethink of the special needs system, as well as more resources and a law change. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The report says the system needs to be based on the rights of children, not rationing of scarce resources. It says too many children are not getting full access to education because schools are under-resourced, and some don't want to work with disabled children and even discourage them from enrolling. Parents told RNZ those findings chime with their experiences of the education system. The Education Ministry says it knows there are problems, but expects improvements from its update of special education will start to be seen next year. This is John Gerritsen.
A witness in the murder trial of road worker George Taiaroa has described seeing 2 people inside a dark blue coloured Jeep the day before the shooting. Quindon Winders, who's 45, denies murdering Mr Taiaroa, who was gunned down while operating a stop-go sign at a tram road bridge in Atayamuri in 2013. A witness, Peter Moran, says a Jeep Cherokee carrying a very large Māori man and another person of slim build followed him at speed along Tirohanga Road mid-afternoon on March the 18th. A third defence witness, who cannot be named, says when he saw the same Jeep with a Māori driver acting suspiciously on 2 occasions in the same area the day before Mr Tairoa was killed. The Crown argues Mr Winders was driving a dark blue Jeep Cherokee when he shot the 65-year-old. A bus driver has been charged over the death of an American tourist who was hit by a reversing bus in a car park at Mount Nicholas Station near Queenstown. The police say a 62-year-old woman has been charged with careless operation of a vehicle causing death following the incident in April. The 73-year-old tourist was taken to Queenstown Hospital where he died from his injuries. The woman is due to appear in the Queenstown District Court later this month. To sport, and the reign of rugby sevens coaching guru Sir Gordon Titchens appears to be over. New Zealand Rugby has scheduled a media conference for tomorrow morning in Wellington, which Titchens and Chief Executive Steve Tew will attend. The All Blacks Sevens were a major disappointment at the recent Rio Olympics, failing to win a medal and were generally lacklustre in their play. In Rio, the 60-year-old Titchens refused to discuss his future post the Olympics, but after 23 years in charge of the national side, time appears to be up. He's led New Zealand to 4 Commonwealth Games gold medals, 2 World Cups and 12 World Series crowns. The 14-time Grand Slam singles winner Rafael Nadal is refusing to overanalyse his surprise 4th-round loss at the US Tennis Open. Nadal, the 4th seed, was beaten in a 4-hour 5-set battle by 22-year-old Frenchman Lucas Pouille. Asked if he thought the mental or physical side of his game had let him down, Nadal says neither.
It was not a physical thing, was not a mental thing, was a terms of a sport. And in a sport you lose or you win. When the opponent beat you, it's not a moment to find excuses if it's mental, physical, or doesn't matter. The opponent was a little bit better than you, and that's it.
Rafa Nadal. New Zealand's Lydia Ko remains at the top of the women's world golf rankings after finishing tied for 5th at the latest LPGA event in Canada. Ko started the day 4 shots off the lead and shot a final round 4 under par 68 to climb 2 places. That's the news.
This Wednesday, we quiz Auckland's mayoral candidates, a full hour from 8 till 9 on the big issues facing New Zealand's biggest city.
You can get out and about and explore a whole range of different things.
Waiheke is the place that's special to me. There's a very strong island spirit.
Summer is my favourite time, and of course it's beautiful. It's unbelievable.
You see the panoramic view, the 2 harbours, and you think, what a fantastic city.
You can listen on radio as normal or watch the live stream on the RNZ website or on Freeview Channel 50. The mayoral debate, live from Auckland this Wednesday morning on Morning Report after 8.
Then on 9 to noon, consumers beware. A new study finds unfair contracts are rife in a whole range of businesses. And after 10, Auckland student Alex Koish hoping to do PhD research to find a cure for her own blindness. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Bay of Plenty. Sunny spells, isolated showers mainly about the ranges. For the remainder of the North Island, scattered showers becoming isolated tomorrow afternoon and fine spells increasing. Northwest gales in exposed places from Hawke's Bay southwards until this evening. For Nelson and Marlborough, scattered showers clearing in Nelson this afternoon and Marlborough later tomorrow. For Buller and Westland, showers north of Hokitika clearing tomorrow morning, mainly fine elsewhere but showers tomorrow night. For Canterbury, north and central Otago, mostly fine, however showers in Canterbury clearing this afternoon and returning there for a time early in the morning. For the remainder of Otago and also Southland, scattered showers clearing tomorrow, then high cloud. For Yorland, a few showers turning to rain tomorrow evening, and the Chatham Islands, rain turning to showers tomorrow. It's just gone 5:09.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. We are going to start tonight with Nikki Kay. As you've heard in the news, the Minister for Civil Defence, ACC and Youth was diagnosed with breast cancer on Friday. A short time ago, the Prime Minister, John Campbell, said he expects Ms Kay to be out of Parliament for months as she undergoes treatment. Here's our reporter, Alex Ashton.
Nikki Kay's diagnosis was announced just after midday today. She'll start treatment shortly, during which she's putting her political career on hold. In the meantime, Ms Kay's asked for privacy, but in a statement on her Facebook page, says the news is devastating. She also says she's hugely privileged to do the work she does, and arrangements have been made in her Auckland Central electorate office so it can continue to hear from constituents. Hundreds commented on the post, hundreds more tweeted messages of support. A close friend, public relations consultant Michelle Bogue, says the support has come from across the political sphere and adds that Ms Kay doesn't want others commenting on her situation. That is, aside from the Prime Minister, John Campbell, who's laid out the party's support for Nikki Kay.
Obviously, we're giving her 100% support. I mean, she is undergoing sort of some further testing. And, I mean, the main point I'd really make is, look, Nikki's young, she's very fit, and she's extremely determined, and she's a fighter. So I'm sure she's going to get through this and will be back with us. But she's likely to be away for a period of time, measured more likely in the months than the weeks, I would have thought.
Nikki Kay's ministerial portfolio will be split between other MPs. Jerry Brownlee will take on civil defence, ACC to Nathan Guy, and Ant Holly will act as youth minister. Mr Key was also asked if the cancer was caught early.
We'll have better information on that in the next few days. She's pretty young to have such a diagnosis, but let's see.
At 36 years old, Ms Kay is 9 years off the age of free breast cancer screening, which kicks in at 45. Every day in New Zealand, 8 women are diagnosed with breast cancer. That's 3,000 people a year. The Breast Cancer Foundation's Research and Communications Manager, Adele Gautier, says women below that age need to be checking themselves for changes.
So for women under 40 who aren't getting mammograms, or in fact under 45 they're not getting free mammograms, it's really important to know the normal look and feel of your breast, and so that you can report changes to a doctor. So you need to figure out what your breasts look like, how they feel, check that regularly, and if anything changes at all, tell your doctor about it.
Adele Gautier says incidence of breast cancer is increasing, but so too is the survival rate. For Checkpoint, Core Alex Ashton, TNA.
It's coming up to 12 minutes past 5 on Checkpoint. We turn now to the final day of an inquiry into homelessness, which has heard a harrowing account of a single mother and her 5 children being left homeless after she left her abusive husband. Sarah told the hearing of a cross-party inquiry at Parliament today that government agencies failed to help them, leaving them sleeping rough or sharing one bed, and that her son almost died from pneumonia. Here's our political reporter, Demelza Leslie.
Sarah turned to Work and Income and Housing New Zealand for help after she managed to get away from her violent husband. She says they initially refused to even put her and her 5 children on the waiting list for a state house.
So we've spent time living in our car and staying in one room in people's places, and all having to share one bed together, and my kids have been really sick a lot. We've all had pneumonia. One of my sons almost died from pneumonia.
Sarah told the inquiry private landlords took advantage of her vulnerable situation.
I had a landlord say I could have their home if I agreed to pay more rent every week and give them a bigger bond, which they then didn't lodge with the Tenancy Tribunal. When they eventually just decided to sell their house and kick me out, they refused to give back my bond with no reason. And when I tried to get help from Tenancy Tribunal, they told me that they couldn't help because the bond was never lodged in the first place. And so we've just really been at the mercy of other people a lot.
The inquiry by the Labour, Green and Māori parties was launched after National MPs blocked an attempt to get a select committee to hold one. It received more than 400 submissions, most of which have been heard over the past month. The Green Party MP Marama Davidson says Sarah's homeless story was a common thread throughout the inquiry.
We've heard of those sort of desperate cases, but also through our own individual communications with people in our communities. We've heard of these situations, and this is what the government did not want to face up to, because then it would make them accountable.
The inquiry today heard it costs about $65,000 a year to keep someone who is homeless. Neville Pearce from the Housing and Health Research Group said most of that cost is in health services.
But it's a substantial amount of police time goes into addressing homelessness, both as offenders but also as victims. The homeless people are in a very vulnerable position to be victims of crime as well. They also tie up the justice system and legal aid.
The Executive Director of UNICEF New Zealand, Vivian Maderborn, said the housing, social support and income systems were broken.
All of these things together have created the current crisis, and unless we're prepared to think about it as a whole messy, complex system, then we're going to distract ourselves by short-term solutions.
A Downtown Community Ministry Director, Stephanie McIntyre, said a shortage of homes was causing the current homelessness crisis.
The greatest priority needs to be on increasing and in large numbers the supply of affordable rental accommodation, and that's where we would like to see you place the emphasis in terms of solutions.
The Labour MP Phil Twyford says the inquiry has been very compelling and it will put the government under huge pressure to respond.
New Zealanders are profoundly uncomfortable with the idea that there are 42,000 people homeless and living in severe housing deprivation. Nobody in this country likes to see that, and yet the government is denying we've even got a housing crisis. They refuse to take part in this inquiry because they basically say they have all the answers.
The inquiry will now prepare a report to present to the Social Services Committee, but there will be no onus on the government to follow up on any recommendations it may make. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Demelza Leslie.
Let's stay with our gallery team. Property investors around the country will be hit with new lending restrictions from the 1st of October. People looking to buy their own home will also find it harder to get a mortgage under the new rules. Now, the change effectively extends the Auckland lending restrictions to the rest of the country. Here's our political editor this time, Jane Patterson.
From October, residential property investors will generally need a 40% deposit for a home loan throughout New Zealand. At the moment, most investors in Auckland have to have at least a 30% deposit, and investors elsewhere have to have at least a 20% deposit. Labour's finance spokesperson Grant Robertson says this shows housing unaffordability is becoming more widespread.
And that investors are taking opportunities in other parts of New Zealand now, and that's driving up house prices, making it more unaffordable for people to purchase their own home. So I think it's inevitable that the Reserve Bank was going to go down this path. What's now needed, though, is for the government to step up and do its bit.
Mr Robertson doubts these new rules will have any long-term impact.
It's quite likely that, as with the last LVRs, this will have a short-term effect on the market. The question is, how do you make a long-term impact on the market? And the Reserve Bank simply can't do that on its own.
The Prime Minister John Campbell says the Reserve Bank's new restrictions are just one measure to dampen demand, and he believes they will have some impact, as the ones imposed previously have.
But like all of the demand management things, they're not necessarily permanent, if you like, in so much that they don't always have a permanent impact, but they'll have some impact. I mean, the Reserve Bank give you the numbers themselves, but they believe in terms of the amount of lending that would have taken place at a higher LVR level without the LVR restrictions, they would be, billions and billions more if they hadn't put in place the restrictions. So they think the general health of the bank's balance sheets improved since LVRs.
Most owner-occupiers will need a 20% deposit under the new rules, but banks will still be able to give loans to some customers with smaller deposits. The changes effectively extend the current lending restrictions already in place in Auckland to the rest of the country. These people in central Wellington support targeted rules for investors.
I think it's a good thing because we need to reduce inequality in New Zealand, really, which means encouraging younger families and lower income people to get into the housing market and making some stricter rules for property investors who are buying their fifth, sixth, second, third, whatever properties.
Too many immigrants coming in now, and especially when they buy houses and just don't even occupy them and then just get the capital gain on them.
But this man Tim says investors do have a place in the market.
We need investors to build apartments and stuff like that. Maybe individuals couldn't do that, so maybe there's something to be said for enabling them to be in the property market.
When he first flagged the new rules, the Reserve Bank Governor Graham Wheeler said the banking system was heavily exposed to the property market, with residential mortgages making up 55% of banking system assets. He said measures needed to be taken as a sharp correction to the housing market posed a significant risk to the financial system. The bank is still considering loan-to-income ratios, where people could only borrow a certain amount depending on how much money they earn. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
In Auckland, 1,300 teachers, teacher aides, principals and support staff have walked off the job this afternoon to meet at the city's town hall to protest their concerns over funding changes. For the first time, the Educational Institute and the Post-Primary Teachers Association have joined forces for their 60,000 members to fight plans to overhaul the sector's funding system. The government is proposing a global budget model for school and early childhood that the unions say would let schools exchange teacher positions for money to spend in other areas. areas. Tom Furley reports.
More than 1,000 teachers and support staff filled Auckland's town hall this afternoon. Their unions are concerned about a proposed change to allow staff funding to be used by schools for other costs. Staff from over 70 primary, secondary and intermediate schools walked off the job, forcing some to close early while others operated with a skeleton staff. Mount Albert Primary School teacher Stuart Andrews was concerned about the impact on his classroom.
The first impact would be in and around our use of teacher aides and the support, and I've got 3 behavioural needs children in my class. The funding proposal that they've put in place looks like it means that the board will have to decide where that money comes from to fund those teacher aid hours, and it means that when the pressure comes on the budget, that's one of the first areas that's likely to get gone, which will make my job a hell of a lot harder.
A media studies teacher at Western Springs College, Melanie Webber, says the changes could impact the number of options for students and would deflect funding responsibility away from the ministry.
We could see class sizes coming down, the ability of boards to cash in teachers when you can't make their budget work, so when you can't afford to pay your electricity bill, so we'll cash in a teacher to do that. It's a general prioritisation of property over teachers, the fact that they're looking at ring-fencing property funding and yet not ensuring that we have a staffing ratio that ensures we have the correct number of teachers in front of kids.
Wesley Intermediate teacher Maureen Dunn takes classes in food technology, fabric technology and graphics and design. She says when she started, every school would have 4 technology teachers, but through funding changes, that's gone down. Ms Dunn says the proposed funding model makes room for cheaper, unskilled teachers to fill the gaps.
It will affect the technology teaching. I'm trained to teach technology. Technology is now, in a lot of schools, in intermediate schools, taught by people who weren't specifically trained for it.
However, the Education Minister Hekia Parata says the proposal is not bulk funding. She says the global budget scheme is based around funding for teachers on a notional average, so schools wouldn't be financially better off if they replaced older, more experienced teachers with new, cheaper ones. Ms Parata says she's disappointed the meetings had taken place, given the amount of consultation with the sector over the past few months.
It's a little bewildering why these additional meetings are necessary in all of that context. So I think it's very disappointing. I think it is an inconvenience and an unnecessary one for parents, but I absolutely accept that the unions have the legal right to hold the meetings.
If the global budget plan goes ahead, it would be in place by 2020. Today's meeting is the first of over 50 throughout the country over the next fortnight, with members voting whether to reject the model and work against it. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
This is just breaking this evening. The Green Party MP Kevin Haigh is to leave Parliament. Mr Haigh plans to take up the role of Chief Executive of the environmental organisation Forest and Bird. He's been a Green MP since 2008 and is currently the party's spokesperson on health, conservation and rainbow issues. A few moments ago he told media there were still things he wanted to do in Parliament, but when Forest and Bird approached him, it was too good an opportunity to turn down.
Well, I think everyone knows I've been working pretty hard this year on some projects like conservation funding, in fact, like trying to secure a thorough national investigation into mental health services. And I had been intending to keep pushing ahead on those projects. What I'm going to need to do now is to hand the baton for those projects over to someone else.
Kevin Haigh stood for co-leader of the party last year but lost out to James Shaw, of course. He admits that was a blow.
I was clear after that co-leadership contest that I was disappointed not to win, but after that I sort of recommitted myself to the task, and I think everyone will have seen that I have worked really hard in my portfolios, and I've been proud to support Materia and James in that leadership role. I think they're both doing a fantastic job.
Kevin Haigh, who's standing down as a Green MP to go to Forest and Bird. Barry Coates, the former Executive Director of Oxfam New Zealand, will enter Parliament as the next person on the Green Party list. 24 and a half minutes past 5 on Checkpoint. A report released today by the public health watchdog says a toddler and her family were failed by the Southern District Health Board, a senior doctor and a telehealth nurse. In 2013, a 2-year-old was taken to Dunedin Hospital's emergency department twice with a cough, runny nose and temperature, but was sent home each time. 2 days later, when her worried mother phoned the emergency department, the call was transferred to a telehealth nurse who failed to respond adequately. The girl stopped breathing later that day, and within 2 hours she was dead from brain pressure caused by a bacterial infection and pneumonia. It was also discovered she had an undergoing acute form of leukemia. The Health and Disability Commissioner, Anthony Hill, says the health system failed the toddler.
I breached that nurse for that call because, in fact, the call was handled in a materially suboptimal way, and in particular in relation to two dimensions. One, he didn't triage and get to the nub of the matter quickly enough, and two, didn't respond appropriately when the mother said that she was going to go. And that was unfortunate as well in this transaction. The child was clearly unwell at that point. The mother was clearly feeling very concerned, and that call was not handled well. This is a case of serious suboptimal performance because, once again, the system had the information that it needed to treat this patient well, and it failed to do that, and it need not have.
The Health and Disability Commissioner, Anthony Hill, and the Southern DHB was unavailable for comment. That was in Dunedin. We head now to Perth, where a 7-month-old baby is dead after a series of trips to hospitals, and a medical centre saw him repeatedly being dosed with Pamol or Panadol and sent home. The baby was Malakai Matui Paraone. If you think that sounds like a Māori name, you're right. Malakai's dad, Te Kepa, is a New Zealander, now living in Western Australia. Malakai became very sick, a temperature, an aching body, limbs very sore to touch, and as he became more sick, his skin began to turn red and then purple. In the course of this progression, Malakai's dad, Te Kepa, and mum Nicole took him to 2 separate hospitals, including Princess Margaret Hospital for Children, PMH. Both hospitals used Panadol to treat Malakai for a high temperature, then sent him home.
So we went home, then we got home at about 5 o'clock in the morning. Then 11:30 that morning, I ended up bringing an ambulance because he didn't get any better. He was actually gotten worse. So I gave him some Panadol as well. In the ambulance got there at 11:30. In the ambulance, he had a high heart rate, a temperature, slow movement, so sore joints, the rash. So when we eventually were seen, this was at PMH, I asked the ambulance driver to take my son to PMH, which is a children's hospital, which specialises in sick children, because Midland the night before said they didn't know what to do with Malakai. So then I said take him to PMH. When he was seen in a toilet, and there was a piece of foam put on a countertop. He was laid on that. He was assessed. He then started having convulsions and vomiting. They gave him Panadol, said it was a popped elbow. He was screaming in pain when they were moving his elbow, but obviously that was sore joints from meningococcal. Anyway, they said his heart rate was 190. They needed it to be 120 before they would allow him to go home. So they found us a bed, put him on the bed, gave him a dose of Nurofen because his heart rate and temperature were still up.
And then they were sent home, the family was sent home. That's Nicole, Malakai's mum. Now, Nicole, Te Kepa, and Nicole's mum became more and more worried. And Nicole's mum took Malakai back to the local hospital. This time a doctor became seriously concerned, and Nicole picks up what happened next.
And he was transported up to, via ambulance police escort, back to PMH, where he started the fight for his life. They put him on life support and he died the next day.
So, Nicole, by this stage, you had been to hospital 3 times and a medical centre once. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
And every time there was either confusion or a misdiagnosis. So they completely missed what was going on with Malakai.
That is correct.
And you knew as mum that there was something wrong, which is why you kept going back. You called the ambulance, you insisted on someone taking you seriously, but you were given Panadol and Nurofen and sent away.
Yep, each time. Yep.
And so, forgive such a terribly blunt question, because this is a heartbreaking story, but do you know what Malachi died of yet?
We don't. There's been a lot of messing around with his cause of death because the hospital obviously know they have made a huge mistake.
So no one's come to you and said this is what your little boy died of?
When they sat me and Kepper in a room and told us he had meningococcal, this is why he was on life support. So when they sat me and Kepper down and said it was meningococcal, I said, well, if he was that sick and he has meningococcal, why did you send us away from the hospital? And when I got an ambulance, they refused to comment on that situation.
And Nicole, have you any idea why you and Kepper have been treated like this? Kepper is sitting beside you, I know, and whilst you're talking, Kepper is a Kiwi, right?
That's correct.
Right, John.
And do you guys have any idea whatsoever why you've been treated like this?
I don't have a clue at all, John. I don't have a clue at all. All I know is that something dodgy is going on.
For people listening to this, because as parents, it's hard to see what you could have done that you didn't do. You went to hospital 3 times, you called an ambulance, you went to a medical centre, you begged and pleaded for people to take you seriously and to give Malachi the appropriate treatment. What do you say to parents who have a sense that the hospital isn't getting it right, that their child is more sick than the hospital is admitting?
If I could turn back time, I wouldn't have left. I want mothers to. I don't want mothers to do it anymore, because mothers do everything they can for their kids. Mothers know when their kids aren't well. If anything, what I want from this is for doctors to listen to mothers. They're not just an over-exaggerating, worried mother. If they're going to a hospital 3 times, if they're ringing an ambulance, keep a baby in hospital for observation at least. A 7-month-old can't talk. I don't understand why my 7-month-old baby, who had a temperature, a rash, a high heart rate, wasn't at least kept in for observation.
That's Nicole, Malachi's mum. Now, this does seem extraordinary to us. We wanted to talk to both hospitals involved, particularly Princess Margaret Children's Hospital. Neither of them will respond to us in any way, shape or form. However, we have just received a media release which has come out from the Australasian College for Emergency Medicine, ACEM. It's headlined West Australian Emergency Departments in Crisis. It talks of gridlock and inability to cope with the challenges that the emergency departments are facing and much more. So we will go back and try and understand why Malachi received this kind of treatment and what exactly went on. Malachi's dad, of course, Te Kepa, is New Zealander. We haven't received a response from Western Australia, but we have received a response from the Southern DHB to the story that we ran just prior to that about the death of the child who was almost 3 years old. Mr. Richard Bunton, Medical Director of Patient Services at the Southern DHB, has sent this statement. This was a very sad event. We extend our sincere condolences to the family and have formally apologised to them for our failure to deliver the care they were entitled to. Such events are fortunately rare and weigh heavily upon all involved. Any learnings that can be taken from the situation are welcome and an opportunity for us to continue to improve our processes to take the greatest possible care to our patients. That from Mr. Richard Bunton, who says Southern DHB accepts the Commissioner's recommendations and is taking steps to implement them. Coming up on Checkpoint, more examples of exclusion and underfunding in special education have emerged today. We have a report. Houses in Christchurch deemed vulnerable to sea level rise will carry warnings despite the efforts of thousands of homeowners. And the US Food and Drug Administration bans some over-the-counter antibacterial soaps, the liquid, the ones that you might use if you're worried about bacteria and what you're touching. Should we do the same here? We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You can text us on 2101 or email us, of course, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And don't forget our excellent and very busy now Facebook page. But here is Katrina Batten with the RNZ headlines.
The Green MP, Kevin Haigh, is leaving Parliament. Mr Haigh has announced he will be taking up a role as Chief Executive of the environmental organisation Forest and Bird. He's been a Green MP since 2008 and is currently the party's spokesperson on health, conservation and rainbow issues. The Prime Minister says he wishes the National MP, Party MP and Cabinet Minister Nikki Kaye all the best as she battles breast cancer. Ms Kaye was diagnosed on Friday and will begin treatment shortly. The 36-year-old has been the MP for Auckland Central since 2008. Police dogs, a helicopter and a large number of officers are hunting two people after a shop was robbed in the Auckland suburb of Hillcrest this afternoon. The police say they chased the robbers who were in a stolen car to West Auckland, where road spikes were used to stop the vehicle. The occupants ran off. 4 people have been arrested, but the police are still looking for 2 others. Cordons are around the Glen Eden railway station. A Hawke's Bay horticulturalist is backing comments by the Prime Minister that immigrants are needed to fill jobs because too many locals have drug problems or a bad work ethic. A record 69,000 people settled in New Zealand in the year to July, while more than 200,000 people are listed as unemployed. The Health and Disability Commissioner is blaming poor communication and bad judgment for the death of a toddler at Dunedin Hospital in 2013. Anthony Hill says the unnamed 2-year-old girl died of a serious bacterial infection and pneumonia, which was not picked up by doctors or a nurse. About 1,300 teaching staff have packed into Auckland's Town Hall to voice concerns over potential funding changes. The Educational Institute and the Post-Primary Teachers Association have joined forces for their 60,000 members to fight plans for a global budget for schools. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thanks so much, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Giles Beckford, and there are further signs, Giles, that the economy is growing at a pace.
Indeed. Good evening to you, John. Yes, it comes from the ANZ Bank's latest look at the commodity prices. These are the main export commodities which generate about half of our export income. And the index is up just over 3% in August, and it's up 11% on a year ago. Now, much of that recent improvement has come from the strong returns from the dairy auctions. You remember that the prices have gone up quite strongly in those last couple of auctions, and that's given the ANZ's index a pretty strong boost. We'll get another look at the state of the dairy industry this Wednesday morning with the latest dairy auction results. The expectations, the signs are from the futures market that there may be another double-digit increase. The suggestion, of course, is that this is wonderful, but it might well be we're actually going at quite a canter. We were in this sort of situation, perhaps not quite so strongly this time last year, where prices were lifting, only for us to have a rather unhappy end to the year. So perhaps just a note of caution we should have about the auction when it comes out on Wednesday morning.
So is the economy benefiting from any dairy improvement, and will it make a difference?
It certainly is. The terms of trade numbers that we had out last week, although the index itself was down because export prices were falling more than import prices, the actual overall picture that they painted was of an economy that's in quite reasonable heart. And this index certainly gives you another indication that we're doing not too badly compared with the rest of the world. It's certainly making quite a few of the bank forecasters suggest that we're going to see growth of 1% or more just for the 3 months ended June. Now that would take our annual growth rate to around 3.5%, and you would have to say that that would be the envy of most developed nations around the world.
Yeah. What happened on the markets today, Giles?
Well, it was looking pretty dire, pretty ho-hum, and then it got just a burst of life towards the end of the session, the last 45 minutes or so. So the top 50 index has hit a new record. It's up 30, where are we? We're up 66 points, in fact, 74.92. That's nearly 1%. So I'd be brave enough almost to suggest that we might touch 7,500 tomorrow. We might just note that a couple of the stronger performers are small companies. Scales Studios, the Apple grower, and Vista, which develops software for movie theatres. They're both joining the top 50 index, and their prices have risen accordingly. And for the New Zealand dollar, nice and firm and steady, 73.3 US cents and 96.5 Australian.
Giles Beckford, our business editor. Good to have you with us, Giles, live from Wellington. Thank you. It's been a difficult time for the world economy in recent years, with many countries still struggling to recover from the GFC, the 2008 financial crisis. And it's against this backdrop of slow growth and market volatility that the annual G20 summit is kicking off in the Chinese city of Hangzhou. Opening the summit, the Chinese president outlined the issues at stake.
The world economy is facing multiple challenges such as inadequate trade demand, financial market turmoil and slow growth of world trade and investment. The G20 consists of the world's major economies, and international society has huge expectations and hopes the summit can work on solutions to the world economic recovery.
The BBC's Robin Brand is at the meeting. He says the mood is, well, to be frank, not hugely optimistic.
Xi Jinping has very adequately there managed to give a concise rundown of what the priorities are. I mean, what's interesting is that there isn't much optimism that a raft of concrete measures are set to be agreed by the end of today that are suddenly going to boost world growth. But, China wants this to be a platform for it to try to show the world that in an era of very stagnant growth, political instability in the European Union, it can be the nation that can provide counter stability to that and try to bring world leaders together to agree on what to do. But I have to say there isn't a sense of optimism here that suddenly things are going to change after this two-day meeting. There have been some interesting bilateral meetings that perhaps have been a bit more significant. That big agreement at the beginning of the weekend between the US and China to ratify the Paris Agreement on climate change. That's hugely significant. And we're seeing the UK's new Prime Minister, Theresa May, here. This is her debut on the international stage, and her big mission is to try to explain to everyone what the UK wants and what the UK now stands for, now that its people have decided to leave the European Union, and also to give a message of reassurance. And she is saying very loudly to anyone who will listen that the UK is very much open for business.
The time is 18.5 minutes to 6. More examples of exclusion and underfunding in special education have emerged today in the wake of a critical report from a community law centre. The report from Youth Law calls for a fundamental rethink of the special needs system, as well as more resources and a law change. It says the system needs to be based on the rights of the children, not rationing of scarce resources. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen filed this report.
The report says Youth Law is getting more and more complaints from families of children with special needs who are having trouble with the education system. It says too many children are not getting full access to education because schools are under-resourced, and some don't want to work with disabled children and so discourage them from enrolling. Parents like Glenys Beersley of Palmerston North say that's been exactly the experience for her 9-year-old who has Down syndrome and developmental dyspraxia.
We've had experiences with being turned away with my youngest son at every level of education, starting with early childhood. When we went to have him enrolled at school, we had the same problem there, that the school suggested that we look somewhere else, that they didn't feel that they were set up for our son's needs.
Glenys Beersley says parents have to make a huge effort to fight for their children, and some simply give up. Andrea Matheson is another parent who endorses Youth Law's report. She says her 7-year-old has autism and attends school only for the 20 hours a week he has a teacher aide. But she blames the system, not the school.
They're absolutely doing an amazing job, doing whatever they can, wherever they can, to find the money to make sure that he can go to school, but it's not coming from the ministry. The funding that he needs is not coming from the ministry. The school is having to find ways to keep him there for the hours that he's there.
The Education Ministry's Head of Special Education, David Wales, says while there are problems, he expects improvements from the Ministry's update of special education will start to be seen next year.
We know that we can do better for a lot of these kids, and that's really what the update is about. We had the chance to talk to parents and educators about what's not working, and we got a really strong sense from them about the improvements that can be made. The update really commits us in the ministry to getting things right and getting things better for these kids.
The Youth Law Report says New Zealand's breaking international law because it does not have legislation ensuring disabled children have an enforceable right to a full education. David Wales says that right already exists through the Education Act, though the Ministry prefers to work with schools to show them how they can include children with special needs.
We think the approach of working with schools to provide them with the skills is the best way to get things started. The legislation does give us the stick that we need. We're able to direct schools when required to take children, and we can go further than that. But it's always best to try and work with the family and with the schools to accommodate these kids.
David Wales says in extreme cases the Ministry can appoint a limited statutory manager or a commissioner to schools that resist enrolling children. But he says they haven't yet had to do that because schools are quicker to accept their responsibilities for inclusiveness than they used to be. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
There have been differing witness accounts about the number of people seen inside a dark-coloured Jeep Cherokee, which the police believe was used in the drive-by shooting of road worker George Taiaroa. Quinton Winders, who's 45, denies murdering Mr Taiaroa, who was gunned down while operating a stop-go sign on a one-lane bridge near Atiamuri, north of Taupo, in 2013. 9 witnesses for the defence have testified today, some via video link, about the days leading up to the shooting. Our reporter Carla Penman is at the High Court in Rotorua and joins us now. Busy old day on the witness front, Carla. What were they saying?
Yes, certainly. So today, as you heard, there were 9 witnesses, and some of which had some very varying accounts of what they saw. We heard from a transport operator, for example, who was delivering supplies in the Tram Road area in the days before the shooting. Now, he says he saw a dark-coloured Jeep-like vehicle come out from the bushes without its headlights on, even though it was at night time, almost as if it was trying to sneak away, sort of thing. He said that it took off in the distance and he lost it around a bend. And there were 2 other witnesses today who also said that they saw a dark blue Jeep Cherokee acting suspiciously. One of them said that there was a very, very large Māori man and another person of slim build in the vehicle, while another person said that there was just a Māori man driving the dark blue Jeep. And we also heard from a woman who said that she was stopped by George Taiaroa at the bridge where he was working, and this was only apparently hours before he died, if not even shorter than that. And she said she talked about a lovely conversation she had, and then also steered attention towards the bushes too, pointing out a man acting very suspiciously.
You've also heard, I hear, in the court, obviously you were there and I weren't, from 2 men who have had, and I think one of them described it in these terms, a scary run-in with the accused. Is that the word one of them used, Carla?
Yes, it certainly was. So there were 2 men, both friends, both builders from around the area, and this was back in August 2012, so several months before this took place. Now, they admitted to firing, one of them shooting a couple of the goats on the side of the road near Mr Winders' property. Now, they took off after that, blaming sort of stupidity at the time for even doing so. But then they said that at their friend's place in Strathmore, Mr Winders turned up, speeding down the driveway and confronted them, swearing at them, yelling at them, and they were just in such shock, and they noticed a gun sitting on his lap and basically denied it then and there, and hid their gun out of sight so as not to make sure that Mr Winders knew that they'd done that. So, and they also said as well that they'd heard talk of him having a very unpredictable side of his nature and just avoiding him.
Thanks, Carla. Really appreciate it. Carla Penman, who's live from the High Court in Rotorua. The trial was originally set down for 4 weeks. It's now in its 5th week, with closing summaries from the Crown and Defence tomorrow, and then the judge is expected to sum up on Wednesday before the jury go out to deliberate. 12 minutes to 6. Despite being told their water is no longer needs to be boiled, many residents of Havelock North are still suspicious about its safety and its quality. Many were struck down, of course, by Campylagabacter after the town's water supply was contaminated. While the Hastings District Council has reassured them that the water is now safe, most residents appear to be ignoring the advice to stop boiling it. Our Hawke's Bay reporter Peter Fowler was in Havelock North today and asked people whether they were heeding the council's advice and no longer boiling their water.
No, I'm still boiling it to drink.
And how long do you think you'll do that for?
Maybe a few more weeks.
You just don't trust the water, or?
I'm just a wee bit worried still.
Yeah, I am.
You are drinking it out
I'm
of the tap?
overboiling it.
Sorry?
I'm overboiling it.
You're overboiling it?
Yeah, no, it tastes all right. It's not bad. Yeah, hope it's all over. I've not killed us all yet.
Thank you.
No, I'm not. Still with the old bottled water. Yeah, don't like the chlorine.
How long do you think you'll drink bottled water?
Until I can't taste the chlorine anymore.
Which might be a while.
It might be a while. I think it's been double dosed or something just to get rid of all the bugs in it, but yeah, not very nice.
Not yet. Yeah, not yet.
Why not?
I'm not sure. I just prefer I'm not really a fan of the chlorinated Hastings water. More just of a fan of the pure water that we get in Havelock. So still drinking out of the bottled stuff that comes from here.
We're not heating it. We're boiling our water, and look, we're buying bottled water to drink.
You're still buying bottled water?
Yes, indeed. I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Why not?
We don't trust.
We don't like chlorine, and we don't trust it. After what's happened, we just don't trust. I'm sorry.
To be honest, I haven't actually been drinking the water because I don't like it to be chlorinated. So I know it's safe, but I sort of don't like the taste. And I'm not necessarily in love with the idea of chlorinated water, particularly at the levels that it is currently. It's quite strong.
No, just still boiling it.
Why?
Well, I don't actually like the Havelock Northern water anyway, so I usually just boil it and have my cup of tea and things, and if I need the other cold water, I just go and get bottled water, but I probably will eventually. I use purified water, though. I've got a purifier.
Oh, in your house?
Yeah.
Right.
So I've always used that.
Did that help you during when the gastro thing happened?
Yeah, no sickness in our family. Yeah.
There's Peter Fowler talking to Hawke's Bay residents, Havelock North residents, about whether or not they're still boiling the water. They're no longer required to, according to their own district council, but as you heard, many of them still are. A point of clarification, and it is a very important one, and we've been contacted by lots of people about it. Thank you. It was a paid union meeting today for the teachers, thoroughly premeditated, organised, pre-planned and pre-arranged, and entirely within the coverage of their contract, and not a walk-off in any way, shape or form, and we apologise for suggesting it was. Let's turn to now Christchurch, where houses that are deemed vulnerable to sea level rise will still carry warnings despite the efforts of homeowners. Christchurch City Council is not backing down despite a peer review which said they should be removed from the 18,000 affected properties until the accuracy of the Tonkin and Taylor report the council was relying upon could be verified. It's a very big issue in parts of Christchurch. Here's our local government reporter in the city, Conan Young.
A year ago, coastal residents facing the prospect of being tarred with the brush of being vulnerable to flooding and erosion were given a reprieve by Environment Minister Nick Smith. He said planning rule changes would exclude making a call on the risk they faced until a proper process could be completed. Fast forward to September 2016 and today's decision to retain the warnings, albeit with a few extra words around further work being required before a definitive statement can be made on the exact nature of the risk. The Council's Chief Executive, Carleen Edwards, says it's important to remember the peer review found the original report the Council relied upon was largely correct.
The conclusion of the peer review panel was that the methodology and data used in the report was probably technically suitable and robust after further work was carried out.
Carleen Edwards says detail around whether a property is vulnerable to erosion or flooding will be replaced with a general warning. She says prospective property buyers will still be able to access the more detailed information by getting in touch with the council. And despite what the peer review recommended, she says the council did not have a choice about whether to remove the warnings from the limbs altogether.
We have a statutory obligation under Local Government Act that if we hold information, then we need to share that, on the limbs and appropriately. So it's important for people who are going to invest or develop or purchase a property that they're made aware of any particular hazards.
Seaside resident and spokesperson for the Coastal Residents United group, Daryl Latham, begs to differ with the council on the accuracy of the Tonkin and Taylor report.
What the Tonkin and Taylor peer review report said was subject
to a review being undertaken and more robust processes carried out, the recommendation was that at this stage was not fit for purpose.
Another seaside resident and chair of the residents group, Tim Sinters, says retaining the warnings prevents him and his neighbours from doing anything with their properties.
It means that when somebody comes along to you and perhaps goes to buy your house and notices a hazard notice, it puts a warning, so it's a bargaining point, so it's hard for the seller.
Councillor David East, who represents the seaside ward of Burwood-Pegasus, says the council has been overly risk-averse when it comes to climate change.
It's all predicated on extreme levels of greenhouse gases. Well, if we were clever enough to harness solar energy more and battery power, the reliance on fossil fuels will just decrease and perhaps the magnitude of climate change may drop with it.
The new amended LIM reports will apply from today. The council's chief executive says the LIMs will be amended again once the review of the hazard report has been completed. In Ototahi for Checkpoint, ko Conan Young tēnei.
5 minutes to 6. The US Food and Drug Administration has banned some over-the-counter antibacterial soaps, both bar and liquid, in part because they don't work any better than normal soap and some good old water, and in part because long-term exposure to some of the most commonly used active ingredients may contain its own risk. Indeed, Dr. Janet Woodcock, the director of the FDA's Centre for Drug Evaluation and Research, said, and I quote, "Some data suggests that antibacterial ingredients may do more harm than good over the long term." This is the retail variety, by the way, not the antiseptic products used in hospitals, for example. But the FDA rule applies to 19 active ingredients, meaning it will have a far-reaching impact. Manufacturers now have a year to remove these ingredients from their products or stop selling them. Now, Professor Julian Crane is an asthma and allergies expert, amongst other things, with the Department of Medicine at the University of Otago in Wellington. Whilst obviously he uses the appropriate sterilisers and sanitisers when he's working in a hospital environment, outside of hospital...
I've never bought one and had one at home, no.
And why not?
Well, because, I mean, many reasons. I think in most settings, we don't need to sanitize our hands. Now, if you're entering a hospital where you may be transferring nasty bugs from one patient to another, then it's very important. But if you're at home where you don't have, I mean, the nastiest bugs occur in hospitals. At home, they're not nearly so nasty. And you know, one doesn't, I've just never, there's no need to sanitize one's hands.
If one felt the need, if you were the kind of person for whom life was easier and better if you were able to sanitize your hands, is there efficacy in these products? Because the FDA is basically saying, actually, a lot of the products that we just buy from the supermarket or whatever aren't doing anything at all.
Well, I think that's probably true. I mean, the problem is that, you know, we were designed to live with bacteria, whether they be on our hands or anywhere else. And we're finding bacteria wherever we look. So in places where we thought in the human body were sterile, we now find there are lots of bugs. And so now we're struggling to find out why we have these bugs and what their purpose is. But, you know, we live in a relationship with them, and we shouldn't be wiping them out willy-nilly. Now, of course, there are some bugs that are really nasty, and they're the bugs that have been bred to, you know, have bred themselves to cause problems, and that is an issue.
But your bog standard hand sanitizer isn't going to get rid of those bugs anyway, is it?
No, absolutely. Well, it'll get rid of some of them, but you know, I mean, a lot of these products say they kill 99.9% of all germs, but 0.1% of many millions is plenty to keep things going. So, but you know, it's the old story. If you come off your bike or scrape your leg down the road, so that you break the skin, the bugs from there are unlikely to cause you any problem. But if you were to do the same thing, say in a hospital, you'd be much more likely to pick up nastier bugs simply because that's where people go when they're sick and when they have nasty infections.
That's Gillian Crane, who was with the University of Otago, the medical school based in Wellington, talking to us a short time ago. We're going to go to London briefly before the 6 o'clock news. A giant wooden replica of 17th century London has been set ablaze on the Thames River in a spectacular reenactment of the Great Fire of London 350 years ago. Now, if you were watching, you will see this. The Inferno in September 1666, obviously we don't have pictures of that, raged for 4 days, destroying most of the old walled city, which at the time was built in almost entirely of wood. Crowds gathered on the riverbanks to watch the 120-metre-long model go up in flames. The art director of Britain's Royal Academy, Tim Marlowe, says it was a unique event. The reenactment was the work of an events company, Artichoke, and an American artist, David Best, who specialises in creating art and burning it. As you do. It's rather wonderful to create that and burn it. It'd be quite nice to create it and keep it. It was quite gorgeous. Anyway, we're coming up to 6 o'clock. After 6 o'clock, more lending restrictions on home loan borrowing. And is Auckland really experiencing a building boom? What's going on? The language is used a lot, but what is really happening? Bernard Hickey's going to join us after the 6 o'clock news. Mother Teresa of Calcutta is declared a saint of the Roman Catholic Church. We will have more on that. And Havelock North children explain in their own words whether they think it's safe to drink their tap water. It's 6 o'clock. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. However you are joining us, whether it is on the radio, old school style, or Freeview Channel 50, or live streaming on the RNZ website, we are delighted to have you with us. Lots coming up in the next 30 minutes, but we begin, as we always do, with RNZ News and Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. The Prime Minister has been accused of demonising New Zealand workers after he said immigrants are needed to fill jobs because too many locals lack a work ethic. A record 69,000 people settled in New Zealand in the year to July, while more than 200,000 people are listed as unemployed. John Key admits high immigration is putting a strain on the country's infrastructure. But Mr Key says the government will continue to bring in large numbers to fill jobs because too many locals have drug problems or a bad work ethic. The President of the Council of Trade Unions, Richard Wagstaff, says the government needs to look at conditions and pay in the horticultural sector.
Demonising New Zealand workers and not giving them a shot at these jobs and creating reasonable jobs is the wrong way to go. And I think it's a political stunt.
Richard Wagstaff of the Council of Trade Unions. The Prime Minister says he wishes the National MP and Cabinet Minister Nikki Kaye all the best as she battles breast cancer. Ms Kaye was diagnosed on Friday and will begin treatment shortly. The 36-year-old has been the MP for Auckland Central since 2008. John Key says he's spoken to her several times since the diagnosis.
Obviously we're giving her 100% support. I mean, she is undergoing sort of some further testing. And I mean, the main point I'd really make is, look, Nikki's young, she's very fit, and she's extremely determined and she's a fighter. So I'm sure she's going to get through this.
The Prime Minister John Key. On her Facebook page, Ms Kaye says the diagnosis is devastating for herself and her family. She says she's been getting strong support from friends, family and colleagues as she prepares to undergo treatment and has asked for privacy. The Green Party MP Kevin Haigh is leaving Parliament. Mr Haigh has announced he'll be taking up a role as Chief Executive of the environmental organisation Forest and Bird. He's been a Green MP since 2008 and is currently the party spokesperson on health, conservation and rainbow issues. Mr Haigh stood for co-leader of the party in 2015 but was unsuccessful, losing to James Shaw. He admits that was a blow.
I was clear after that co-leadership contest that I was disappointed not to win, but after that I sort of recommitted myself to the task, and I think everyone will have seen that I have worked really hard in my portfolios, and I've been proud to support Materia and James.
Kevin Haigh. Barry Coates, formerly the Executive Director of Oxfam New Zealand, will be joining Parliament as the next on the Green Party list. The Education Ministry's head of special education, David Wales, says it knows special education needs to improve and changes will begin next year. Problems with the system were highlighted today by a critical report from the Community Law Centre Youth Law. It highlighted under-resourcing and exclusion of children with disabilities. Dr Wales says the ministry has talked to parents and teachers to find out what needs to change, and the first major steps in that process will happen next year.
We know that we can do better for a lot of these kids, and that's really what the update is about. We had the chance to talk to parents and educators about what's not working, and we got a really strong sense from them about the improvements that can be made. The update really commits us in the ministry to getting things right and getting things better for these kids.
David Wales says schools are much better than they used to be at accepting their responsibility to include disabled children. About 1,300 teaching staff have packed into Auckland's Town Hall to protest over potential funding changes. The Educational Institute and Post-Primary Teachers Association have joined forces for their 60,000 members to fight plans for a global budget for schools. They say it's bulk funding and would let schools exchange teacher positions for money to spend on other things, resulting in fewer teachers and larger class sizes. Staff from more than 70 schools took part in the first in a series of nationwide union meetings that will be held over the next fortnight. A dermatologist says antibacterial hand wash and soap ingredients that have just been banned in the United States are no better than normal soap and could even be harmful. The US Food and Drug Administration has banned 19 active ingredients commonly found in household antibacterial products. It says manufacturers have not been able to show the products are safe for long-term daily use or that they're more effective than plain soap and water in preventing illness and infection. A Hamilton dermatologist, Amanda Oakley, says New Zealand's Environmental Protection Authority should be looking at that ruling very carefully. She says there's evidence antibacterial hand washes could be contributing to antibiotic resistance. In sport, the All Blacks are predicting a physical rather than niggly approach from Argentina in this weekend's Rugby Championship test in Hamilton. The All Blacks have enjoyed 2 straightforward wins over Australia in their opening games, the second in Wellington becoming a niggly affair when the Wallabies tried to provoke the All Blacks into retaliation. Lock Brodie Retallick says he doesn't mind that style of game as it indicates the opposition isn't focusing on the game, although he admits it can get frustrating.
There's a line where you've got to stand up as a team and realise that we're not just going to stand there and take it, and then there's a point where it diverts you from what you're doing. So as an individual you need to be aware of when that is happening to you and you're being taken away, and when you just realise you're standing up for your team. So at times that probably got a little bit better of us, but I think overall we handled it pretty well as a team.
Brodie Retallick. New Zealand's world golf number 1, Lydia Ko, has been named as a finalist for the American Women's Sports Foundation's Sportswoman of the Year Awards. Ko is one of 10 finalists along with a number of Rio Olympic stars. They include American gymnast Simone Biles, American swimmer Katie Ledecky and American tennis legend Serena Williams. The Auckland motor racing driver Scott Dixon has won the second to last round of the IndyCar Series, but won't be in contention to defend his overall title. Dixon, who started on pole, dominated the race at Watkins Glen in New York to finish well clear of the field. That's the news.
Tonight on Night's New Zealand History with Professor Giselle Burns. It's always going to be a can of worms. She'll also explain what Oliver Cromwell had in common with Governor Grey. We have a window on the world of the natural food business, but what, pray tell, is an unnatural one? And Eric Brenstrom brings you the world's weather. Has it stopped heating up yet? So many questions, so little time. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Bay of Plenty. Sunny spells, isolated showers, mainly about the ranges. For the remainder of the North Island, scattered showers becoming isolated tomorrow afternoon and fine spells increasing. Northwest gales in exposed places from Hawke's Bay southwards until this evening. For Nelson and Marlborough, scattered showers clearing in Nelson this afternoon and Marlborough later tomorrow. Buller and Westland, showers north of Hokitika, clearing tomorrow morning. Mainly fine elsewhere, but showers tomorrow night. Canterbury, north and central Otago, mostly fine. However, showers in Canterbury clearing this afternoon and returning there for a time early morning. The remainder of Otago, also Southland, scattered showers, clearing tomorrow, then high cloud. Fiordland, a few showers turning to rain tomorrow evening, and for the Chatham Islands, rain turning to showers tomorrow. It's just gone 6:08.
Thanks so much, Katrina. The Reserve Bank has confirmed it's tightening the screws again on home lending in a bid to rein in the housing market. New rules for investors and owner-occupiers will come into effect on October 1st. Most investors in Auckland will need to have at least a 40% deposit, up from 30%. Investors elsewhere will also need 40% under the new rules, compared with at least 20% now. Housing affordability, or the lack of it, of course, is something that the government is being really pushed on. And they've been, in recent weeks, talking up the biggest building boom in Auckland in history. But is that really the case? And what difference will tighter home lending restrictions have? Financial analyst Bernard Hickey is the publisher of Hive News. You can find it online. He's been doing fascinating work on the building boom. He joins us now live from the Wellington studio. Welcome back to Checkpoint, Bernard. It's always nice to have you with us. Can we talk about the LVRs for investors and owner-occupiers? Will they make a difference?
Well, they might slow down prices temporarily. That's what we've seen with the first two versions of the LVRs. And certainly outside of Auckland, where there isn't quite such a supply shortage, it might have quite an impact. However, there's still plenty of demand coming in from migration and population growth, particularly in Auckland. Interest rates are low to falling, and so not too many people have great hopes that this is the silver bullet to stop the house price rises.
No, and I want to talk about the building boom because I'm fascinated by your work on this. But just before that, Vancouver and the tax on foreign buyers, which has seen a real fall in both the number of sales and the value of property. John Key didn't sound that keen on it when he was asked about it on Morning Report this morning. Is there any way whatsoever this government will look at that kind of thing?
Well, John Key has already floated the idea a couple of times. You're right, this morning he said he doesn't think there's that much of an issue with foreign buyers, although, again, he's relying on some flawed data, which I suspect we'll find out more later on this year and early next year, will show that the percentage of foreign buyers is a bit higher than the net 1% he talked about this morning. Also, it's in his back pocket if he needs to, before the election, be able to fight back against not just Winston Peters, but the Greens and Labour, who are saying they would ban foreign buying. He says that restrictions, or more importantly, a land tax or a stamp duty on foreign buyers would be permissible under our free trade agreements. Although, interestingly, this morning he did point out that China may be an exception under those free trade agreements. So that's the risk.
Yeah. Can we turn to the supposed, the much discussed and widely touted construction boom in Auckland and the amount of building work actually going on? Why aren't the numbers as good as they might appear on the surface, Bernard?
Well, because actually in 1974, all that time ago, we were building so many more houses proportionate to our population. So right now, Auckland is building about 6 houses per 1,000 people. Back in 1974, Auckland was building 16 houses, so more than twice as many as it is now. And one of the problems we have is that for at least a decade we haven't been building nearly enough houses in Auckland to deal with the population growth, because Auckland has not only got lots of migration, but it's got quite a young population, so it's growing quite quickly. And for a bunch of reasons, in particular a lack of government funding for state housing and also government support for private house building, we're not seeing the number of houses being built. And that's obviously going to be one of the big debates ahead of the next election. Who's going to fund these houses that need to be built?
So on a per capita basis, and if you directly compare with 1974, not as many are being built. What about the value of the properties being built? How much are they costing?
Well, that's the difference. We've got lots of money being pumped into our houses. They're huge houses, the few that are being built, often more than 200 square metres. We're talking about McMansions here, the 4 or 5 bedroomed, 2 romper-roomed, 3 garage houses. Unlike in 1974, when we were building 2, maybe 3 bedroomed, fairly simple houses. And that's because back then, to be able to buy a house with a state advances loan, so this is a government subsidised loan, you had to buy a particular house that was built under a government plan. So there was a group building scheme which specified how big the house would be. Now, at the moment, the only houses that are being built are the ones that are frankly being paid for by people with lots and lots and lots of money. And because developers see that's where the highest margins are on these expensive bits of land. So we're not seeing the affordable houses built at the scale we were back in the 60s and through into the 70s.
Bernard Hickey, the publisher of Hive News, H-I-V-E News. Thanks so much, Bernard. We really appreciate your time. The lawyer for 2 soldiers found guilty at a court-martial after being found acting strangely in Palmerston North on Labour weekend last year say their rights were breached in several ways. Lance Corporal Joshua Mapson and Private Barclay Bishop were part of a group of 8 soldiers who took a drug commonly known as N-bomb and ended up in police custody. After being found guilty of breaching service discipline, Mapson's rank was reduced and both men were fined several $100. Today, they've asked the High Court in Wellington to overturn their convictions. Our court reporter Anne-Marie May was at the court-martial appeal.
The drug's effects caused some of the soldiers to hit their heads against cell walls while in police custody, and they were later taken to Palmerston North Hospital. Their lawyer, Michael Bott, today questioned the legality of the Army's taking of samples from Mapson and Bishop to test for drug use. Mr Bott said Defence Force rules allow a commanding officer to test anyone involved in a workplace incident or accident if there is reasonable cause to suspect drug use may have been a factor. But he says that situation doesn't apply in this case.
If there was no power because they weren't involved in a workplace incident or accident to do it, then it irretrievably taints whatever you do with all the samples, because they were not at work or in a post-incident accident or event. They were off duty, in town, having a night on the town.
Mr Bott said the samples were taken without the permission of the Director of Military Prosecutions, and their use at the court-martial breached the soldiers' rights not to incriminate themselves. He said there were also other deficiencies in the way the samples were handled and how forms relating to the taking of the samples were filled in.
In this form here, it appears to be we don't mind. Whatever box you put, it'll do, because we've got reasonable cause anyway. So it does appear as though there's one standard for the appellants, and yet for the prosecution or the hierarchy, it doesn't matter if they play fast and loose with the DFOs themselves.
However, the Defence Force's lawyer, Major Matt Harding, said the quality of the testing was not in dispute.
Because a qualified person conducted it. Corporal Skipper conducted it. He didn't sign the form. He was aided erroneously by Staff Sergeant Packer after the tests were conducted. So the tests were taken by a qualified individual and they were sealed up by that same qualified individual.
The 3-judge panel hearing the case also questioned Major Harding about drink spiking, something the soldiers had claimed might have happened to them. The judge at the original court-martial ruled evidence about that must be ignored. The High Court is expected to reserve its decision. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
16 minutes past 6. A Hawke's Bay apple grower is backing the Prime Minister's comments that immigrants are needed to fill jobs because too many locals are drug users or have a bad work ethic. But a union says John Key's comments are a political stunt and the government should be doing more to improve employment conditions rather than demonising workers. Catherine Hutton reports.
Leon Stellard owns an apple orchard in the Hawke's Bay and says aside from the weather, dealing with workers is the most stressful part of running his business. In his experience, New Zealanders will work for 2 days and then fail to show up for the next 3, even though the fruit needs picking. So he's learnt to compensate.
I use a theory, if I need 30 people, I get 40 people locals, because on average I only have 30 every day. They just don't turn up, they couldn't get a ride, or I don't know. But their reliability, you just can't depend on it.
He says with 200,000 people registered as unemployed, he, like other growers, would like to know where these people are.
Once upon a time you'd put an ad in the newspaper, looking for pickers or people to come thinning. You'd get dozens of calls. Nowadays you don't get a single call.
The Prime Minister says employers repeatedly tell him about the trouble they have hiring local workers.
Some of these people won't pass a drugs test, some of these people won't turn up for work, some of these people will claim they've got health issues later on. So it's not to say that there aren't great people that don't transition from working and come into work, they do. But it's equally true that they're either living in the wrong place
or they just can't muster what is required to actually work.
But Richard Wagstaff, who heads the Council of Trade Unions, is describing the Prime Minister's comments as unhelpful and unwelcome.
Demonising New Zealand workers and not giving them a shot at these jobs and creating reasonable jobs is the wrong way to go. And I think it's a political stunt.
It's not the first time a government minister has criticised New Zealanders' work ethic. In April, the Deputy Prime Minister Bill English told a Federated Farmers meeting that a lot of people who were available for farm work were pretty damned hopeless. Leon Stallard says the Recognised Seasonal Employment, or RSE scheme, which brings in workers from the Pacific Islands, is essential for his business and others like it. He says seasonal workers from overseas are more reliable and more productive.
Last year I might have had, out of 30-odd people, I might have had 2 New Zealanders, other than my permanents, that came to work for us. And then they'd come and say, yeah, we want to come for the season. And then 2 weeks later they go, oh, no, we've done that, we're going to go and do something else. And then they would leave. And you go, okay, I've just trained you. And you go, all right, we'll try again.
But Richard Wagstaff says the comparison between local and immigrant workers isn't a fair one.
To have a situation where you have workers who are very vulnerable, who are effectively bonded, who have borrowed thousands of dollars to get here and set up new lives, and they're in debt to their employer, and to compare those people with New Zealanders who are only offered casual work with low wages, with little prospects, and say, oh, migrants are better than New Zealanders, is an entirely unfair and unreasonable comparison to make.
Mr Wagstaff says the union wants better conditions that attract more workers, rather than jobs with poor career prospects. For Checkpoint, Catherine Hutton.
A crackdown on illegal mining has landed 6 gold prospectors in hot water. All of them, who were operating in Westland and Southland, have been put out of business and 2 face prosecution. Eric Frickberg has been looking at this.
New Zealand Petroleum and Minerals has appointed a former police officer to check that gold prospectors have a permit for their work. His boss, Alana Miller, says mining companies often spend time and money getting approvals to hunt for gold, but then have their work taken advantage of by opportunistic neighbours sneaking onto their claim area.
They were either operating on conservation land or areas where people already had the appropriate permissions in place. These individuals were going in there and taking advantage without the appropriate consents and permissions.
Adrian Field, a Christchurch mining engineer who does work on the west coast, describes how these fly-by-nighters operate.
They go into land which is, on the face of it, vacant. They don't bother to check out the mineral status of the land and just put a digger in there, start treating it. And it's not until someone goes past that might know the landowner that someone sets off some warning bells.
Under long-standing law, gold belongs to the state, even if it's under private property, and the gold-seeking permits acquired by legitimate companies are valuable, so illegal gold mining amounts to theft either way. Adrian Field says it can be profitable theft for the perpetrators.
If they happen to get onto the right lead and the right deposit, you're talking probably hundreds of thousands of ounces. Depending how long they get away with it before someone blows the whistle on them.
Gold is currently worth over 1,800 New Zealand dollars an ounce, but Chris Baker of the mining lobby group Stratera says illegal mining is a hit-and-miss affair done by small-timers who would be unlikely to make big money out of what they do. Nevertheless, he has a simple message for them.
Breaking the law, there's no room for people who break the law. End of story.
Until New Zealand Petroleum and Minerals got tough on this, very little was done about it. Alana Miller is adamant her organisation is doing the right thing with its crackdown, but she concedes ending the problem for good won't be easy.
So this is just our first year in looking into this, and a lot of New Zealand and a lot of the places where this is happening, it is very remote, so it is quite hard to detect. At the moment, this is the start.
Illegal mining is punishable by up to 2 years in jail or a $400,000 fine. The mining operations in question all involved alluvial gold. For Checkpoint, Eric Frickberg.
Let's go to Australia now, and that very strange story about the Trump family, the Australian family of 5 and their erratic road trip. It's got even murkier after daughter Ella Trump was charged with stealing a car a day after expressing relief her missing father Mark had been found alive. Police say the 22-year-old stole a car in New South Wales and drove it back to Victoria after she split from her parents during a really mysterious road trip. Channel 9's reporter Kieran Jones has the latest.
Ella Tromp, the youngest of the Tromp siblings, has been charged with car theft and also possessing the proceeds of crime in relation to the car that they used, herself and her sister used, to make their way back towards their Sylvan home. They allegedly took the car from the Jennelin Caves and tried to make their way back towards Sylvan, just east of Melbourne. Along the way, Ella's sister Rihanna unfortunately became separated from her, and she ended up staying in New South Wales while Ella made her way back to Melbourne. And Ella has now been charged with those two offences of theft and also possessing the proceeds of crime in what appears to be just another twist in this case that keeps having twist after twist. We spoke very briefly with Ella. She remains at home at the moment. She said that she was unwilling to comment on these charges. She was actually charged last week with this crime on the 30th of August. So, in fact, that Tuesday where the story first unfolded was the day that she was charged. So it's something that she has had knowledge of for a little while. She said that today she wasn't willing to speak about it. She's just focused on getting the family all back together. Her brother Mitchell wasn't at home. He's gone up rather to catch up with Mark, their father, who was found on Saturday afternoon wandering through Wangaratta in northeast Victoria. So the Tromp family are really at all corners of the eastern seaboard at the moment. We know that Rihanna and the Tromp mother, Jacoba, both remain in hospital. They're both being assessed for mental health conditions at the moment. Of course, it was Jacoba who was the person who allegedly told the family that they were in danger and that they needed to flee the home in Sylvan. They all piled into the car and fled north towards New South Wales and eventually ended up in Bathurst, and that's where everyone started splintering off into different directions. So Jacoba and Rihanna, who's 29 years old, they both remain in hospital. Interestingly, Rihanna was also charged with car theft and possessing the proceeds of crime, but those charges were dropped by New South Wales Police under the Mental Health Act, so they obviously have some concerns about her welfare going forward.
That's Kieran Jones from Channel 9 in Australia speaking to the ABC. Mother Teresa of Calcutta has been declared a saint of the Roman Catholic Church, fast-tracked to canonisation just 19 years after her death. Tens of thousands of pilgrims packed St Peter's Square at the Vatican for a service to honour the nun. Ashraf Fahim reports.
Declared a saint before the multitudes. Just 19 years after her death, Mother Teresa was canonized by Pope Francis at the Vatican.
We declare and define Blessed Teresa of Calcutta to be a saint, and we enroll her among the saints, decreeing that she is to be venerated as such by the whole Church.
The tiny nun worked with the world's neediest in the slums of the Indian city now known as Kolkata, and was one of the most recognizable faces of the 20th century. Her work with the poor and famine victims earned her the Nobel Peace Prize in 1979. Aldo Campioni was one of the more than 120,000 pilgrims who packed into St. Peter's Square.
I think they had to make her a saint. She was a woman who gave a lot to people and the entire world. She was an example to all. She deserved this.
But Mother Teresa had her critics, too. They said she did little to alleviate the pain of the terminally ill and nothing to tackle the root causes of poverty. At the Missionaries of Charity in Kolkata, the nunnery Mother Teresa founded in 1950, the nuns watched the ceremony live on TV. And they celebrated as their founder became Saint Teresa, joining the canon of over 10,000 Catholic saints.
That report from Reuters, 6 on Checkpoint. To drink tap water or not to drink tap water, that is the question for many young children in Havelock North daycare today after the boil-only notice was lifted at the weekend. It can be hard to keep up with the dietary needs of your customers at the best of times, but today Paul Rooney of Village Kids discovered that despite the children being told they can drink the tap water, many call it, and I quote, sick water. And in some cases, they just prefer to drink water that comes out of a box or a bottle, not the tap.
My mummy got the tubby, but not me.
Not you. Are you going to drink the water out of the tap now?
No.
No? Are you... Tell me, what is your mummy and daddy drinking the water out of the tap or...
No.
No? Where are they getting their water from?
The boxes.
The boxes. And are you still drinking the water out of the boxes?
Yeah. We put them in the Lawton cups.
Are you going to drink the water?
No.
Why not, Ella?
Because I live with the sick water is in the tap, so I drink the safe water. I buy water.
What about at your daycare centre?
Yeah.
Are you drinking the water out of the fountain or...?
No.
No? Where does the water come from?
The boxes.
The boxes. Oh, that's good. Do you think it's good to drink the water anymore?
No.
No? You know we've been told that the water's okay to drink. Do you think that you're still going to drink it even though we've been told it's okay to drink?
No.
No?
Yeah, because when I was brushing my teeth, my teeth we need to keep drinking the water out of the box because if the bug come back again. I think my mummy is sick and I need care.
Oh.
When I drink the water out of the tap, it comes from at Hastings.
Oh. Yeah, it does come from Hastings now, doesn't it? Because what's wrong with the Havelock water?
It has a bug in.
Has it still got a bug in?
Yes.
Okay. And Lockie, do you bring a bottle to your daycare centre or do you drink out of the boxes at the daycare centre?
We drink out of the boxes.
Do you? Do you ever think you'll drink out of the tap again?
I think not.
You think not?
Yeah.
Why do you think not?
Because it's got the bug.
Yeah. Even though we've been told there's no bug there, do you believe what they've been saying to us?
Yeah.
You do, eh? You believe what adults tell you, don't you? And then some days they tell you to drink the water,
Yeah.
and then some days they tell you not to drink the water.
No.
And is that confusing? Yeah?
Yeah.
That is Paul Rooney of Village Kids talking to some of the delightful children at Village Kids who are not yet persuaded the water is safe to drink. Out of the mouths of babes, right? It's 6:30. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The CTU is accusing the Prime Minister of demonising New Zealand workers after he said immigrants are needed to fill jobs because too many locals lack a work ethic. The public health watchdog says doctors and nurses who have worries about a patient need to speak out after a toddler died at Dunedin Hospital. The government minister, Nikki Kaye, says being diagnosed with breast cancer is devastating news for her and her family. The Green Party MP, Kevin Haig, is leaving Parliament to join Forest and Bird. The police are searching for a man who jumped the dock in the Lower Hutt District Court and knocked a police prosecutor chasing him unconscious. 5 people are now in custody after a police chase across Auckland following a robbery at an electronics shop. Our next news and weather is at 7.